Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and start this evening's presentation. My name is Rebecca Castellano, and I am here to represent with my colleagues Joyce Connell, working behind the scenes, and Allison Winston on your screen, the school counseling program at Pleasantville High School. And we are thrilled this evening to bring a wonderful panel of college representatives as well as private working consultants in the field and gap year representatives to talk a little bit about college planning, the process, what to be aware of, and what options are available if the family chooses not to go straight on to a four-year or chooses to take some time in between high school and the college experience. So we have such a knowledgeable group of folk, and we are really excited to have them. But let me start with introducing my own department. As you see on your screen, this is our school counseling department. We hope that you know your counselor and she knows you well. We encourage you to start your meetings with them this term. Our kickoff to the junior advisement started last month when we hosted a presentation for juniors, giving them an overall understanding of what the college process, search selection process was like. We are now into our first week of junior advisements, and I encourage all students to check their Outlook calendars to make sure that they know when their appointments are so that they meet with their counselor. And now this is our third event in a series of events that will also have essay writing as well as interview opportunities later in the spring. So just a little housekeeping before we launch in. The question and answer feature is available to use throughout the evening. Our panelists will be answering those questions either during the presentation or at the end of the presentation when time permits. We also have the closed captioning available for folks who would like to take advantage of that. And we will be recording this presentation and then posting it on our PHS website or the YouTube channel. So let me start by doing some introductions and then kick off the evening. My first panelist is Craig Broccoli, who is a long-term colleague and a fabulous representative for Binghamton University. Craig has been working with us for as long as I've been here, 7 years, and at least 10 years at Binghamton. So Craig, I'm thrilled to have you here. I love your insight. It's always good information that you bring to our family, so thank you very much. Next is Sarah Miller. Sarah is representing the University of Delaware. As a native of Delaware, she is very familiar with what UD has to offer, both as a student and former student and now representative of the university. Sarah brings to us so much information about Delaware, as well as lots of really thoughtful information about the college admissions process in general, and some good insight to what students need to think about as they're going through the process and kind of starting their work and figuring out what's the best fit. So moving on. Julio A. Torres Jr. joins us from Western Connecticut State University, and we're thrilled to have him here. While he is representing Western Connecticut State University in this presentation, he also has a lot of experience working at Marist and also FIT in the city. So we're excited to have you here, and thank you very much for coming. And lastly, not lastly, of the college reps, we have Ben Kavanaugh, who is representing Bucknell. Ben has been working in admissions for 17 years and currently serves as the Associate Director of Admissions. We're thrilled to have him here and to give us a perspective from a smaller school. Thank you for joining us. And then Catherine. Oh, this is where I'm going to mess it up, and I'm sorry, Catherine. So Catherine, help me with your last name. I just had a moment.
Stevater.
Stevater. Catherine Stevater.
Hello, everyone.
I'm sorry. Catherine is joining us from Gap Year Solutions, and she is a founder of Gap Year Solutions. And the purpose of the organization is to help students figure out what to do with that time, either after high school or if they choose to take a break after high school before they enter college, if they enter college. She is based out of Boston and is bringing to us a wonderful perspective that I don't think we talk a lot about and still has a lot of value that we should kind of put on the table and kind of think about as an option for all students when and if appropriate. So thank you very much, Catherine. And lastly, now it is a lastly, we have Bob Sweeney, who is a wonderful friend to our group of counselors in the high school. He brings with him 14 years in college admissions and over 30 years as a high school counselor, formerly working at Mamaroneck High School, right, as the head of guidance there. And he's currently working in college admissions, working as the College Access Program, through the College Access Program, which is run by the YWCA. And thank you, Bob. I really do appreciate you joining us this evening to give us your insight in terms of how students and families can best prepare. So, with those introductions done and in order, I'm going to go ahead and kick off this presentation with my very first question, which I am going to throw over to you, Bob. If you can please help us with the following. What recommendations do you have for students and families who want to begin the process of exploring college and finding colleges to apply to? Where should they start? It's always confusing.
Well, Rebecca, I think I'm going to start with a sign that I had in my office for all those years that I was counseling. And it kind of gives a basis, maybe my first recommendation, but also as my philosophy towards college admissions. And it's a quote by Mick Jagger from one of his most well-known songs. And the words are, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just find you'll get what you need." And as you go through this process, and you may not get what you want right now, but think of what Mick's advice is, you get what you often, and most of the time, get what you need, maybe not what you always want. And to frame the advice I can give, I have to rely on, not 40 years of experience as a guidance counselor, but also 1 year as a parent. And I went through that process with my son, who graduated from Ossining High School 10 years ago, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And he made it easy for me in many ways, because the first bit of advice is, you don't always have to, at the beginning, just name colleges, but think about the criteria. And I'm sure you'll be doing that in the meetings. The first thing usually the counselor doesn't ask, well, tell me what colleges you're interested in, but what's important to you. And those factors are location, cost, choice of major, size, and then selectivity. So that can be the basis for forming the list, to narrowing the list down from 3,000 colleges in the country to a workable and sizable number. And I'm sure that will be a big part of the conversations you're having with the juniors.
Absolutely.
And those were discussions that I did have with my son, and he helped me out because he was pretty definitive about a couple of things. One, he said, he was a political junkie, so he wanted a political science major. He said, 4 to 5 hours away, which is what so many students will tell you. And then third, which he surprised me with this, he wanted to join Army ROTC, which came as a shock. But also when I found out that the Army will pay his tuition for 4 years, I was happy to hear about that. And so he made it a little bit easier because he had about a 92 GPA, a little over 1,300 in SATs, and the usual AP courses. So I knew he was going to get accepted to a lot of colleges. So we created a list to look at. And that list was something like this panel, because there was a little bit of everything in the list. And on that list was Binghamton. A great that was my choice, since at the time it was $16,000 a year for room and board and tuition. And I think even Craig can remember me from those days pushing Binghamton. There were 3 public universities outside of the state: Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia Tech. 5 private colleges: Dickinson, American, Loyola, and GW. So that was a pretty eclectic list. We were able to visit all of those schools in 2 visits. So by June, he had a pretty good idea of where he wanted to apply. Of course, it took a lot of coaxing and a lot of work, to get him to fill out the applications while he's trying to go through senior year of high school. But he did, and he applied to all of those schools by November. Early action, which certainly I encouraged. And I thought, well, this is going to be easy. I'm looking at the list. I think he can get into every school. And by October, though, he mentioned one more school to me. And he said, Dad, I like the list I have, but I want to apply to one more. And I said, okay, what do you think? What are you thinking about? He said, I really want to apply to Georgetown. And my immediate thought was, he's never going to get in, but I can't say no. And the other thought was, if he is going to get in, how is he ever going to make it in 4 years to get through calculus and get through their foreign language requirement? So my advice when you're looking at college is not only to look at what it takes to get in, but what you're going to need over the next 4 years to get out. But my son did the one thing that I've been telling students for as long as I can remember: don't fall in love. Keep your options open. Keep your mind open, because you can be disappointed. In my mind, I knew what he was really, and as the process went through, as we got close to the decision deadline, he became more and more enamored with Georgetown, especially after visiting.
Right.
He got accepted to all of the other 9 colleges, but he had to hear from one more by April 1st, and he was rejected to Georgetown, which I was not surprised. And but I can tell you, by 2 days later, he was wearing a GW sweatshirt. So, they get over those losses quickly.
Right.
And he wound up going to GW. He wound up going to ROTC. And I can tell you, he had a great experience. So he got what he needed. So I just want you all to keep that perspective. And I can tell you, he got his master's from GW in public administration. He did some great internships. And I often ask him, are you really sorry you didn't go to Georgetown? And he said, no. Do you realize the Metro doesn't even go to Georgetown? So he loved GW. And I can tell you today, he's a legislative director for a congressman working on Capitol Hill, living the good life in DC, and he's a captain in the reserves.
Right.
And it all worked out.
That's awesome.
But he got what he needed. So
thank you for sharing that.
As you're going through the process, just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Bob. I think that is all really important information. So looking at the qualities of the school, looking at the locations of the schools, and also being open to new ideas, that it's more than just the 10 names that you hear about over and over again, that there's a wealth of schools and programs available that might be lesser known, but still hold quite a bit of value. But I also then want to turn this over to Ben. And Ben, if you can speak to this a little bit, I often have students who then come back, lists are made, and the worry and the concern is, how do I know it's the right fit? What does fit mean? What should students be aware of? And how would you go around advising that piece?
Well, I think a lot of what I have to say would probably echo what Bob has just said. It's the college search process is an existential process, right? Everyone's going to get a different outcome. I think what you have to do at the beginning is ask yourself, what do you want out of college? Like, what would you want in the experience? Like, who do you want to become? What kind of experiences you're looking to have? What kinds of things are you hoping to happen? Like, how do you picture yourself 10, 20, 30 years down the road as a result of attending, an institution of higher learning? Like, what are you hoping to get the experience? And also to understand that it's not an instantaneous thing. You get as much out of it as you put into it. And I think a lot of students, it helps to put a little bit each time as you go, and not just sort of cram at the end, like so many of our students do with their term papers. It's called a term paper for a reason. So that's the thing, is like, first, just what do you want? And I think it fits a lot easier once you sort of figure out what you want. Of course, the challenge is, there's a exercise I heard a counselor do where they just ask the students, like, just write down as many colleges as you can. And most students don't get beyond 15. So you really don't have to sense the landscape. So I always advise students, just start visiting colleges within your area. Visit the liberal arts college, visit a sort of state flagship, visit kind of a college in a rural location and an urban location, just to get a sense of what's out there. I always compare, and I know this comparison makes no sense to high school students. I say it's almost like buying a house, because everyone has sort of this wish list of what they want, right? They want amazingness, and they want to pay nothing for it. And then they go out into the market and see what's available, and then they have to make adjustments. And I think part of it is, you'll see things that you're like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. I have to have that. And there's other things you thought were super important that aren't. So, I think it's a constant process. And I think, you want to take your time, you want to be thorough. It's a hard thing. It's really one of the first things you do as an adult, is this college search process. So, part of it's just giving yourself space to just think about, just asking yourself some hard, honest questions, like, what do I want out of this? Like, are there things I want to work on? Because the beautiful thing about college,
Right.
especially a place like Bucknell, a liberal arts institution, it's really 4 years to work on yourself. And let me say, as a middle-aged person, you'll really never get another 4 years in a row that you can just work on yourself, experience things, try things out, go to the random play, take the random class, something that may change your life. So I think, part of it is, what am I open to? What do I want to experience? What's out there? Doing the research. You want to involve family, because you want that support system. It's a lot easier when your parents especially are on board, I think, with what your choice is, and they understand what your process is, and you're not just picking an institution because they appear a lot on TV playing football on Saturdays.
Right.
So that's the thing, is like fit. I would disagree with Bob slightly. I think there is certainly an intellectual component to it, but I think there's also an emotional. I think students are best served where they pick places that serve their intellectual needs, but also where they feel a part of the institution, where they feel at home, especially that's something they're looking for, that school spirit. Don't pick the institution where the college bookstore has like 10 square feet of gear for sale, Pick the place that's got a 30,000 square foot floor of merchandise for sale. That's usually a good indicator. So I think it is a balance. But I also advise students, spreadsheets of your friends, figure out a methodology, figure out kind of different categories and rate them. And also, it always surprises me how many students during information sessions and during visits don't take notes during the information session, and don't take pictures or videos during.
Yeah.
Like, you want to be able to remember some of this stuff, so it's kind of fresh in your mind, because, especially if you're visiting multiple colleges in a short period of time, they will all blend together, and you don't want to sort of kick something out before you're like, oh, I haven't really had a chance to consider it. So, yeah, I would say in terms of fit, there, like I said, it's an existential thing, but it's also about planning. It's also about doing the hard work intellectually, and then sort of going from there.
Well, and you say something that's incredibly important in all of this. You're really pointing to the student taking the lead and the family doing the support piece. That
Yes.
This is one of those times or one of the first times where the student does need to take the lead on that. And they need to kind of work on figuring out what's going to be the right fit for them. in
Because
terms
the
of
student's doing
getting
work.
school and all that.
I tell you, professors
Hey.
have very little capacity for parents who call up, wanting to try to get extensions for their child's term papers. That's not really how this is going to work. So, it is ultimately about what's going to be the student figuring out kind of what they want and just sort of figuring out the institutions that are best going to leverage that. And
Thank
of
you.
course, you want places that you can afford.
Yeah. And I like how these conversations kind of just lead to the next one. And Craig, I'm going to grab you for this one. We talk about getting out there, diversifying who you're looking at, making sure that you broaden the list and not try and fall in love with just that one, but be open-minded across the board. Can you speak a little bit about that, like the college list? There's panic in the air because people have heard it's just that much harder. And so there's this philosophy of, I'm just going to apply to as many as I can. And Common App makes that happen very easily, as we've seen. And so when is it too much? How do you kind of tone it down? Where do you go with that? What would you advise?
Well, I love that Bob and Ben did give a very in-depth sort of emotional and intellectual feeling about what will make the most sense in the long run, because that's a good question. The list itself starts with a big list of the schools you're going to go check out, visit physically, and actually probably virtually, which you should do both if you can, just to get a lot of content and get the facts and figures straight and the emotion right. But ultimately, yes, this is you're trying to get into a school or schools that you're going to do well at and make an impact at. And if that is the framework of what you're starting with, your list will be a very manageable one. It's not just going to be a list of names that you're happy to get into.
Okay.
You should be happy to get into all of the ones that you get into. That should be genuine, but that's the goal, is not to get into college. Yes, that's part of the process, but it's actually to find a school that you're going to succeed at and make the world better because you went there, and all the good stuff about what the 4-year experience is. I always try to encourage families. I grew up in the Westchester County area. I remember how competitive it was and how competitive it continues to be under the framework of, well, so-and-so didn't get into this school and so-and-so got into that school. And this idea that there's a data driving your decision, a set of data driving your decision, and also the storyline of the past. Where I go with this is usually you're looking at about 10 schools, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on what you're looking for and where you're looking to go. And probably want some, financial good options on there. Yes, maybe an in-state or 2 options, and maybe some out-of-state and private and public on both fronts. That's your sort of basic framework. They have to fit your genuine needs of academics and so forth, of what you're looking for out of a college from a degree standpoint.
Right.
But you do want to make sure you have a balanced list of schools that you academically fit in with what they offer and how you fit their average student profile. Again, taking off this idea of I have to get into a school that I didn't think I could get into and therefore I succeeded. You're trying to get into a school that you're going to do your really best work at. And sometimes that means you are the middle of the road student there. That's where you're aiming this. You might know your academic averages by the end of junior year. You should. And you also might have some other components like test scores if you're going to use that. That gives you a numerical way of finding maybe 3 schools right in the sweet spot where you hit their averages. Maybe there's a couple schools on your list that you really love them. You're just below some of their averages. It's a reach school. And certainly there are going to be some schools that you also like that are on your list that you're above their averages. You might be in contention to get a good scholarship at that school because you're academically above their average student. That could be a benefit in the long run. So that's part of the balance side there. But Rebecca, you're asking me this question, but the students are going to be coming, I hope, to your counselors. They understand the landscape as current as it is. That's where you really hone in on the practicality of that list. So I always try to encourage students, check with your college counselor on this front, your guidance counselor. They know what's going on. They check in with us.
Yeah.
We certainly are going to tell you what's present, what's current. Colleges, we want you to ask us questions. But if you're asking 30 colleges on your list, what's going on there, what's the averages, that's an overwhelming experience. Say you get into let's go back to the 10 schools. You get into three
Yeah.
of the 10 schools you got into. You can only go to one of those schools. You yourself, as a family, as a student, your acceptance rate of colleges is 30 or so percent, 33%. You are more selective than the majority of colleges out there. So know that you have a lot of power in this, but you don't want to make this an overwhelming experience in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think any of you can speak to the fact that when you're filling out applications for 20 schools, 15 schools, it's exhausting. And you might not always be doing your best work and putting yourself in the best place. And as you guys are reading the applications, you can see it. You can see where the hearts lie and how much time has been spent and how well it's been done. And that comes through. I mean, unless anybody disagrees with that, I mean, that's what we see too, you know? And then we have the student who has been chugging away for 4 years, does great, does the college admissions piece, and starting to feel like maybe this isn't what I want to do right off the bat. Maybe this is something that I want to do at some point, and maybe not right now. And so maybe there's an issue of deferring, or maybe there's an issue of just trying to figure it all out. And Catherine, this is where we bring you in terms of that perspective. Help us understand, what is a gap year? What are the misconceptions? What are the benefits? Like, give us that idea in terms of what that looks like and how it can either benefit college admissions or take away. So I just gave you 15 questions in 5 seconds. Feel free to piece it out.
Okay, so do I get like a half hour? How long do I get here, Rebecca?
You get but moments, my friend. but
Moments. Okay.
Give us what you have.
Okay, so first of all, as a gap year consultant, most people have no idea what I do, but I'm like a college consultant, but I just work with gap year students. So there's a process for a gap year to have a successful gap year. I want to pipe in here too, because I think it's awesome that the college and admissions officers are talking about making your list. How do you get those colleges and what's appropriate for you? And I think that we spend so much time making sure that maybe you get to visit some college campuses, big, small, urban, suburban. We take a lot of time trying to figure the college school fit out. But I always ask students as well as parents, have you asked the question of, if you find the right fit and you get in, is it the right time? Like, are you ready? So that's how I really want you to think about this tonight, because if you have the right school, you get in, you're excited. Do you have fire in your belly to get on that hamster wheel for 4 years of academics right then? Or would a year benefit you? And that's a question that a lot of families are starting to ask more right now. So real quickly, to me, a really simple definition of what is a gap year: it's an intentional time off from traditional academic studies. And I want to say intentional because the student has to choose this. It's not like the parent can say, oh, I think you should take a gap year, or the counselor. The students have to own this. And to me, I don't necessarily love the word gap year. I think of it as like a discovery year, or who the heck am I year. It's a year of personal growth. And I go back to what Ben, you said, when you go on a college campus, you have 4 years to kind of try out different experiences and different classes. I think of the exact same thing for a gap year. It's 1 year of your life. It's a blip when you're 17 or 18 years old, but the experiences that you have are life-changing. And it could actually set you on a much better path when you hit a college campus, because I feel like you get one shot at being a freshman. So I always say to students, make sure you're ready. Make sure you're ready to get on that academic wheel, because honestly, that is what college is about, along with the social skills and getting your feet wet and independence. So when I think of a gap year, the amount of independence and confidence that students gain is amazing. You have to have a plan, though. A plan really before you graduate, at least for your first semester. When I think of a gap year, I think of a college year, but in 2 semesters. First semester, some experiences. Second semester, some experiences. So it's not like this big, what am I going to do? It's not so overwhelming. And it's basically every single gap year is unique. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to sign up for a gap year. No, it's as unique as every student is. So the benefits are, maturity for sure. Like literally a year older, your brain is a year older. So you're going to make better choices. I think the idea of decision making and problem solving, Most students in high school, parents are helping, guardians are helping them make decisions, and counselors. When you get on a college campus, you're kind of on your own. Like, are you ready to make those decisions? And, you know, I always think about life skills like budgeting, basic skills like, you know, laundry and getting your driver's license, learning how to network, like all of these life skills that are not necessarily taught anymore in high school, but we're expecting these kids to just thrive when they get on a college campus. What else? I think basically understanding about who you are. I think in high school, students are labeled, and it's a year for just putting your shoulders down and finding out who that true authentic student is. Because I think of, you know, Bob, when you're talking about, you know, you got your sweatshirt, my aha moment is, who's the kid under the sweatshirt? Because you're so much more than the name of the college on your sweatshirt, right? Who is that person?
Right.
With that said, there's, I mean, so many benefits, but I also know as a parent myself, there's also some myths and misconceptions. And one of the big ones that I hear about a lot, or people ask me about a lot, is, oh, it's too expensive. Like, how would I afford a gap year when we can barely afford college? And if you learn one thing tonight, it would be a gap year costs what you can afford. I have many students that I work with that actually work to help pay for their experiences. I have students that their pocketbooks are huge. So it's anything that what your family can afford is what the gap year can cost. So every single student can benefit from a gap year. The next misconception I get a lot from students is FOMO. Oh, you know what? I don't want to do a gap year because I wanted to stay on track with all my friends. I just want to keep going. I got to follow the herd. I can say that if you have a plan, like, you know what you're doing in the fall, so your friends are going off to college and your plan starts September 1st and you have an idea and you're excited about it, you're good to go. And by the way, most kids, well, the majority of the average in high school, they don't necessarily graduate in 4 years. So your friends may take a year off in college, or they may, you know, take a semester off. And it's just a time in your life when you actually don't have school, you know, mortgage payments, you don't have student loans, you just have this time to make it your own. Another big misconception is it's all about travel, and absolutely not. I have many students that have no interest in traveling. I have many students that want to try internships to actually dip their toes into some profession that they've never thought about before. I think of a gap year as a time to learn about what you like and learn about what you don't like. So basically, I think any student can benefit from a gap year. And I don't know how much more time I have, Rebecca, but as you can see, I could go on and on.
No, I think it's an exciting way of taking a look at what life could look like if you don't do the perceived program. You do high school, then you do college, because that's what you're supposed to do. And supposed to is defined differently for all. And I also appreciate the perspective that these are not decisions that you need to make in junior year. These are decisions that you can make as you're going through the process, as you're gaining all your acceptances. It's not the time to say, I'm not doing it, therefore I'm not taking steps to plan for after high school, because we hold college information planning sessions, but we also really want to host post-high school awareness sessions. This is not just about filling out the applications, but also kind of listening to where you're at now and how can we help you grow to get there. You start, I think, Craig, you said it last year so beautifully. I had a parent write in about it. You said something about high school is the place where you start your inquiries. It's where you start to get excited about the things that you want to do in the future. It's not where you accomplish all your goals in high school. College is that next step that kind of helps you continue to explore it. And that time in between, that gap year, those moments of reflection, can only feed that experience as well. And there's a lot of planning that goes into this college experience or this gap year experience. So Julio, I'm going to turn the next one to you. And the question is, you know, we have a variety of families on tonight's program who have had students go through it, had them go through it either pre-COVID. And we also have a good number of families that have never had a student go through it, might be first generation, might just, this is their first senior. What would you give those first-time parents through this process? What's the information? What's the best advice that you would give? What should they be prepared for? You're muted.
Thanks for having me. And I would say the first thing is breathe. Breathe. This is a process. It takes a time. You, they have a wonderful counseling department to work with at the school, with you and your colleagues. You've done this before. Um, it's also a very individual process. So if you are a parent who's had multiple students go, what worked for the first one or the second one may not work for the third one. Times change, requirements change, processes may change. So each individual process is there. If you're a one and only like me, everything's all about that one student going. So, you know, again, first thing I always say is breathe. It's a process, as all of my colleagues have said. And there is no one right way to do this process. There is the process that works for you.
Right.
The other thing I would say is, it is the student's process. It is not the parents' process on some level. It is not their siblings' process. It's not their significant other's process. It is their process. So there has to be a little bit of student awareness, but also familiar awareness, because it is a family choice in the end.
Mhm.
So sitting down, having those talks, having those opinions, bringing all of the things that my colleagues have already said to the table, and going through those and starting them in little bites. So now is a perfect time. If you haven't had those conversations, have them, tonight, tomorrow. If you've already had them, increase them, continue them. Have those honest conversations about what is the distance we're looking for? What is the finances we're looking for? What are the types of schools we're looking for? One of the best advices I learned over time is, and we talk about cultivating lists and talk about all of that, is okay, students, you pick 3. Parents, you pick 3. And then pick 3 that are out of the blue. Guarantee you somewhere in the middle, you're going to have conversation which may lead to another school you didn't even think about. Rather than be set one way or the other. Because I can tell you, I've been doing this for a while. I can tell you many, many students who ended up at institutions they didn't even know about, or parents didn't even know about, just based on keeping an open mind through the process, or a counselor's recommendation, or meeting somebody at a college fair that happened to mention something else. So keep an open mind through the process. You're going to be thrown with a lot of information.
Yeah.
And ask questions and utilize the counseling department and utilize us admissions counselors as well.
Thank you. I love that. Taking little bites, not being so overwhelmed by it, because it can feel really scary and it can feel really daunting. And you hear a lot of new terminology when you start, right? It's early decision, early action, rolling, get it done, get it quick. And that's where it starts to feel like the panic hits. And that's where I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And I want you to talk a little bit about admissions planning. So, folks worry because, it's that next chapter that they have to work on. It's that they have to plan on. And the worry is, I'm going to be too late. I should work really hard to get all of my stuff in early. So I'm going to apply over the summer. And it opens on September 15th. I got to get everything in by September 15th, and it just opens, but there's no fine deadline yet. And then you hear a lot about the use of early decision, the use of early action. So with all of that said, Sarah, what do you think, or how do you feel the EDEA was looking like this year, your experience with it in admissions? How does that work for students? How should families plan around that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I do want to preface by saying it might look differently depending on different schools you're looking at. So one thing to keep in mind is some schools offer early action, some schools offer early decisions, some only offer regular decisions. So first, learning what your school that you're looking at offers is really helpful when you start that process. Like for an example, University of Delaware, we do not do early decision. We only have early action and regular decision. But walking through a little bit of what early action looked like this year, what it means, some benefits. So for us this year, early action was really big. We definitely saw a increase in early action applicants as compared to last year. And I think for that same reason that you're talking about, I think that pressure, just maybe the anxiousness of, do I start now? That, the application's open. Should I begin? So we definitely did see more students applying through early action this year. And if any of my colleagues want to talk a little bit about early decision, please do. But I will say, in terms of University of Delaware, some benefits to that early action applicant pool. Early action students, it's a guarantee that they hear back earlier in the admissions process. Admissions process typically looks like end of summer, starting that first couple months of fall. That's usually where you're beginning the application stages. It looks different for everybody, but that is where you might at least maybe create the account, and then you kind of go from there. So that's typically where we see students at. Early action deadlines usually fall sometime in November, give or take. And then with early action students at University of Delaware, we guarantee that they receive their decision by the end of January. So it does put that process a little kind of scooted up a little bit. And as far as the year goes, the benefit is that you're hearing back sooner. So that might give you more time to make your decision. Maybe you didn't get a chance to visit all your schools, but you were admitted to this school earlier. So maybe now you want to attend like a admitted student day. So it is nice to kind of have that information available to you. Another benefit, and I usually encourage students in this way, is that early action can benefit students looking at more competitive majors. Once again, different for different universities and colleges, what that means for competitiveness. Nursing is a wonderful example of that. Nursing programs tend to be smaller in size, but they have a very competitive applicant pool. And so that's where early action can be beneficial. I always try and paint a picture for students. If you can picture every program or every major has a certain number of seats in it, for an example, and let's say you applied early action and you got admitted, it's kind of like you got your seat. It is going to vary based on different schools. University of Delaware does admit by major. So that is another factor to take in consideration when you're considering applying early action or regular decision. But that's just some of the benefits I tell students if they are considering the early action process. Now, if you are a student who maybe you need extra time, maybe you are looking to have an upward trend in your grades senior year, maybe you're still on that process of searching and hunting and looking, it is absolutely okay to wait until you're ready. I will say regular decision timelines will vary. Ours is usually mid-January that timeline comes up. So it does offer students a little bit more time in the process. So that's
No, that's helpful.
general. Yeah.
I'm going to ask, so I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ben because I've got to follow up in terms of the ED piece, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of the EA piece, the early action deadline, playing it out, working with families who might be concerned that if I'm the top of the list, I'm going to be read first, the likelihood of admissions is only going to increase that much more for me. Do you wait until the deadline's hit? I know that every school may do it slightly differently, but if you're receiving an application in August for fall of next year, are you reading it in August? Or are you waiting until you get a little closer into the fall, closer to the deadline, and then start to read in waves? And I invite any of the reps to also speak to this piece as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. Admissions kind of works in cycles a little bit. I think that's the best way to highlight it. If you've attended any visits in your high school, you probably have met a representative. So during that period in fall, usually between September, October, maybe early November, we are traveling to schools, we are going to college fairs, we are doing panels. So at that time, application reading is definitely not on the top of the list at the moment, which does hopefully alleviate some of that panic. I need to get it in August 1st because it opened August 1st.
Right.
We're probably looking at it right away, August 1st. It usually is a little bit later in the process. So that's helpful to kind of ease some of that
Thank
nervousness.
you.
Yeah.
And Ben, I'm gonna put you on the spot on this one, if that's okay. Just if you can speak to the ED.
Mhm.
So knowing that the ED or the early decision is a committed experience, this is the school that you know that is the fit for you, the program for you. Financially, it's what you can do. You go ahead and apply ED. When is ED not the right time to use? How do you not use ED? And does going ED increase your chance of admission because you're saying, I really love you, but I might not be the best fit for you?
Yeah, I think it depends on the college in terms of how big a benefit is. I think for us, ED is a huge thumb on the scale, maybe even a whole hand on the scale. I think this year we'll probably end up admitting about 2/3 of the applicants who apply to the ED rounds will probably be overall maybe mid 30%. So yeah, I mean, that is basically, you apply early decision because, you have done your homework. Most students who apply early have visited, they've done the tour and the information session. Many have been a revisit, they've done sort of a day in the life. They've sat in on a class, or they've had more specific, they've done an open house or had a more specific experience. So they've really done their homework. And, they have a process and, this is where they want to go. And, they want to commit and get it over with, because we actually do 2 rounds of early decision. Our first deadline is November 15, and the second one's January 15. So November 15, we have answers out a month later. Although this year was a couple of days early because the dean had a holiday in Australia that he had to. So that was easier for everyone. This year we're actually we're actually sending decisions out on Monday for ED2. So, but to answer the second question, we actually don't start reading until early November. So I'm always been the idea of the opinion. Yeah, there's really not a lot of benefit to rushing in the apps. I mean, the deadline's there for a reason. I wouldn't be the person who submits 11:59, but we're kind of expecting you to use the time to really think about what you're putting down, especially things like essay, to really sort of smooth things out, to make sure what you're presenting is polished. But yeah, I think the big benefits of early is, you get the process over with. You find out the decision. If you're in ED1, you've got spring semester to worry about all the AP exams that you probably have to study for. And just I think hopefully a sense of calm and stillness, like, college is sorted at least. I can focus on, all the other fun stuff of my last year in high school. The challenges, I mean, we do award financial aid. We try to award the same packages in early that we do in regular. But yeah, I mean, one of the negatives is you can't compare packages with other institutions. We're going to make the same need-based aid package in early as we'll make in regular, because it makes no sense to admit someone and not be able to fund them. So that's kind of our philosophy. I mean, there's certainly institutions where the ED is probably not as big an advantage as it would be at Bucknell. I mean, I think it depends on the individual, but also I think, you want to pay attention to kind of what they're saying in terms of, we're probably looking between the 2 ED rounds to enroll probably half our class.
Okay.
So it's a big part of kind of how we build
Thank
a
you.
class. So, but yeah, again, I think not every, if you look at, we had over, close to 11,000 applications. We actually were up double digits in both ED rounds, but down about 8% overall. So it was kind of a strange year.
Wow.
But, you look at the total of the pool, the totality of the pool, less than 10% of the applicants are applying in the ED rounds. Most students just aren't ready, and that's okay. It's not for everybody. It's not for students who are like, I really don't know what I'm looking for. I really don't know what I want in this process. I haven't had the conversation yet with family in terms of what our budget is and what we can realistically afford.
Right.
And still be able to do things like, live semi-comfortable lives. It shouldn't be used as kind of like, I don't know, playing, where you're just putting all your chips in the middle of the pot and have it look at your hand. which should be the worst way to play poker. Not that any of you play poker, except mathematically, lessons, but it shouldn't be used as like this kind of gambling chip. It should be like an informed, like, okay, I've done my homework, I've done my research, I've done my process. This is where it settles. It makes sense financially for my family. I kind of want to get over with. And certainly, we're also kind of like Delaware. We actually read by major as well. So we have certain programs like management and engineering that are also capped. So, you also have to look at, well, okay, the admission differences in applying something like management and early versus regular are massive. So, I have to think about that as well. So again, it's one of those things that shouldn't be taken lightly. It should be part of your process. It's not for everybody, and it's okay that it's not for everybody.
Thank you for saying that, because sometimes people are feeling like I have to have one in there, and that's just not the case. If you're not ready for it, then you're not ready for it, and it's not the right set of school. It's not a decision that you need to make right there and then. That's what
Well, the worst case scenario for us is if you stay for a year and transfer. That's what we don't want. The students we admit, we want them to enroll and then graduate. So
Okay.
we want it to work for you as well, and we're rooting for it to work.
Exactly. Sarah, you joined us.
Yeah, I was just waiting for the next part. Yeah.
Here we go. So it was actually leading me right to you, because what we've also seen, tongue in cheek, we're calling it the year of the deferral. We're seeing a lot more deferrals in terms of, and let me identify what that is for the families who are joining us. It's students who've applied either early action typically, and sometimes early decision, who instead of getting a yes, come to our campus in the fall, are getting, let's wait and see. It's a hold into the regular decision pool. So they're deferred into the next round of admissions to be considered with another pool of students to see whether or not they make it into the school or gain that admissions. And we've seen more in the last few years than we've seen in the past. Can you speak to that in terms of what you're seeing at Delaware or what your network is seeing? And Bob, feel free to join this as well, because I saw you pop on, in terms of why is this happening? And what can families do when they see, what can students do when they see themselves on that deferred list?
Yeah. So, okay, couple parts here. The first thing I think is always the empathy piece, because that feeling of we're not ready yet or we need more time is scary and can be alarming. So one, that's always something I love to acknowledge with any student who I've talked to who's been deferred. Like, I know that this is probably really tough. So let me walk through what it means, how it works. So for us, we saw a record number of applications. It continues to go up every year. I think right now we're just under 37,000 applications. So when you see your application numbers increase, the thing that doesn't increase super often is spacing and capacity. I know Ben mentioned the idea of some majors like having caps. You'll see universities where they have a certain number of housing spaces available, or in order for a program to be run successfully and still have great outcomes, it needs to be a certain size, and keeping class sizes, a reasonable size so that all students are being met where they are. So you'll see that while applications increase, the what word am I looking for?
The capacity to hold them on campus is not.
Yes. So it's saying the
faculty
same.
that are available are not increasing either.
Right. And when that is so different, it definitely creates more of a higher selectivity in the application process. It is not a signal that a student is poor performing or not worthy, not deserving. It just means in certain years that application pool can look a little bit more competitive depending on the amount of students that have applied. And I think that's another thing to note, is that every year will look a little different. And I know sometimes students will talk to friends or family members who apply to schools in the past, and accepting that this might have happened this way in the past doesn't mean it's going to continue that trend in the future. Now, talking to a student that has been deferred, a couple of things I usually share with them is mid-year grades is always something we want our deferred students to send in to us. It's nice to see how they're doing that senior year. So my advice always is to all students is that don't give up senior year. I know the what's the word I'm looking for? The senioritis is something. So showing that while there might have been a point in your high school career where maybe your grade slipped up, maybe something happened. Showing that that upward trend during that senior year is something really great to see.
Yes.
And then another thing, this isn't required by University Delaware standards, but I do see a lot of our deferred students, they tend to update the admissions committee with what they're currently doing. So whether it's a new activity, maybe they were a part of a sports team, but now they're captain this year, or maybe they just got awarded a new senior award. Once again, not required, but it is nice to see what the student has been working on, what they're proud of, and then all that information is taken into consideration during that review process. So it's not fully a negative thing. There's definitely ways to highlight yourself still as an applicant.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. It's really about continuing the good study work that you've been doing and just the student updating the colleges and universities and the family they're supporting that experience.
Right.
Bob, did you have something that you wanted to add to that?
The only
Please.
thing I would add is, from the student's point of view, a deferment is getting deferred, especially in December or early January, when you're surrounded by other seniors who have been accepted early decision or early action at their first choice, and you're sitting there with that one letter. It can be discouraging, especially because it's maybe the first letter they're getting, and it could be the only one. So my advice always is, okay, let's move on. There is a shot, there's an outside shot they're going to get, but it's not great. I mean, if you get deferred on that first round, I don't give an awful lot of hope. So that means now look at your other choices and start to learn about them and get excited about them. And tell the college that deferred you, you're not mad, you still love them, but move on.
Thank you. Ben, I see you.
I just wanted to weigh in on the deferral piece. It's not actually something we do much at Bucknell. I was just looking at our numbers. You could count on one hand the number of students that we deferred this year. And for us, and I think part of it is also what's the philosophy of the institution. For us, it's usually because of a very specific reason. The student who tends to get deferred, because like I said, we usually like to say yes or no. If it's no, then it's like, all right, it's, the worst thing that could happen is you apply ED1, you get deferred to regular, you get waitlisted, and then you're sitting there May 1 and you're going, I applied in November, man. I don't know the answer. This is, and who wants to be the person who's drawn out? So for us, the student who tends to get deferred is someone who's a late bloomer and we're not quite ready to pull the trigger. So for us, we're usually looking for another quarter or semester grades where we can go, okay.
Well, stick with this right now, because then it gets into the next piece, like looking at smaller schools. And Julio, I invite you as well, working in the smaller schools and my state universities, y'all can pitch in on this one too. Let's talk a little bit about the weight of the interview, the essay, the letters of recommendation. How do those play out in terms of that review of application?
Yeah, I think for us, again, I think with a lot of selected institutions, what tends to get lost is I think at a certain point, certain things don't add anymore. Right? Is there a huge difference in our pool between, say, someone with a 1520 and a 1580 on the SAT? No, they're both in the top 1%. At a certain point, that doesn't really add anything else. Is there a huge difference between a 3.9 and a 4.0? Not really. I think, we sort of evaluate in different areas. For us, we evaluate academics in kind of an area. We evaluate kind of engagement, like in terms of in terms of activities, in terms of things outside the classroom. We sort of evaluate writing in a different area. We sort of evaluate, kind of personal qualities, like what we think they might bring to the institution or maybe potential impact. So a lot of these things get separated into different categories. So, it's always funny when you see sort of these YouTube videos where they give a bunch of academic stats and they're going, well, how come this person didn't get that college? And I'm sitting there going, well, what was their essay about? How much was their engagement? Just having an award doesn't really add a lot if it's just something they did once for 2 hours on some random, weekend as a sophomore.
Yeah.
So I think for us, if I was sort of looking at all those factors, depth of engagement in terms of activities would probably is a big factor in a lot of ways, as big as the academics, especially for us as a residential campus. Someone who would come to Bucknell, go to class, and then go back to their dorm room is probably not going to be happy in a small town in central Pennsylvania, a residential campus. We want people that, they're going to be involved in things, they're going to do research, they're going to join clubs, organizations, they're going to make friends, they're going to try to ingratiate themselves in the community. So for us, that kind of engagement is as important in a lot of ways as, academic qualities. So that's why we kind of look at it separately. And we have a wide range of things we count for that. Writing is also, it's not just kind of a measure of, does a student need remediation in terms of writing, but also how does their mind work? How do they choose to write about a subject? What do they reveal about themselves? You get 11,000 applications and you read them all. You're looking for that spark, you're looking for that personality. So again, that kind of gets grouped separately. The letters, the recommendation letters reported, what we're hoping the counselor gives us kind of a global sense of the student, how they compare to classmates, but you also have to take into account, like my territory, I have schools in Texas and Illinois that are over 4,000 students. I know the chances, I was looking at an applicant from Plano East High School. They had 1,400 students in their senior class. So you kind of temper your expectations a little bit in terms of what you're getting out of the counselor. You're like, if they've met them a couple of times, they're lucky. The fact that you guys are smaller than, so I think is a blessing. It really is, because you just can do things on a more human scale. What we're hoping the teachers give us is like a sense of like, what's this person like physically in their classroom? I mean, we have their grades, but what do they do? Do they enjoy learning? Do they ask questions? Do they seek input or advice if they're struggling? What happens? Because I think the biggest question I always have, especially with your academic high flyers, is, well, what happens when they inevitably have a bad day, when they get an underwhelming grade? What's their reaction? So many top academic students have no grit at all because they've never had to do anything. What is their reaction when things don't go their way? So a lot of these things, we're looking for sort of human pieces. We're looking for sort of individual pieces. We're trying to get a sense of the whole person. So we're always going, okay, is this student, can they handle the work academically? Are they going to thrive on campus? And then how competitive are they in the individual major? Now, the interview piece, we actually don't interview. We're actually one of the few liberal arts colleges that doesn't interview. And I think that's kind of, we haven't done that for several years. I think the reason we went away from interviewing is we felt like it's very difficult to have a conversation with somebody and then use the output of that conversation to predict an outcome.
Right.
Otherwise, the GM of the Yankees could have a conversation with the free agent pitcher and go, oh yeah, they're going to win 24 games next year, which would be great, but it hasn't happened yet. So I think that's one of the reasons we kind of went away from it, was because it wasn't really helping us predict which students were going to be successful. And I think for us, it's not just the academics, it's also other factors as well. And the totality of that, helps us answer the question, will this student ultimately take advantage of the chance they're given by, if we say, yes, we want to admit the student. So we try to make it as complex as possible, I think, on purpose.
No,
The
I
question
think
I always hate to get is like, what's the one thing I can do on this process to stand out? And we try to deliberately create a process that doesn't depend on one point, unless you can say reasonably, Nobel Peace Prize. Let's say there's no Nobel Peace Prize, you're getting in. But again, other than that, we're going to look at a wide range of things. And I think that is I think that's a good thing. I think it's for the benefit of the student.
Thank you. Julio?
Yeah, I would, echo many of the things Ben said. I think, and when I do panels like this, I always caveat with, it all depends on the schools you're applying to. So if I had one piece of advice for all of the people that are listening, it's ask the exact same questions to every single school that you're thinking about and you're applying to, because they're all going to give you a different answer of what they're looking for. So we're all going to look at the transcript, but some of us are going to put more emphasis on an essay. Some are going to put more emphasis on a recommendation. Some are going to interview. Some are not going to interview. Some are going to put more emphasis on junior, senior grades than freshman, sophomore grades. Some are going to put more emphasis on, the fact that you played sports versus you didn't. Some may or may not. We're all
Right.
going to do it differently. But if you ask the same questions to all the institutions, you'll get the answers that work specifically for you at that school.
Gets back to that idea of having a more manageable list.
You
Well,
can't, yeah, I would
have
say
to.
definitely a manageable list, but also manageable expectations
Hmm,
of what you're doing. So for instance,
Yeah.
every school I've been at, we're always going to look at your transcripts. That's first and foremost. Are you academically eligible for that institution? Then we get into the next phases, as Ben was speaking about.
Right.
Are you a fit for the institution in many other ways? Is
Right.
there a grit there? Is that? And I will say this, I've seen many students who've been deferred in my time end up being my students that I'm congratulating walking across the stage.
There you go.
So again, it's one of those things of, is that where you want to be? And if that is, there's a lot of different ways to get there. And sometimes it's not as a freshman. So again, we're trying to make a very complex set of variables simple, and sometimes it just isn't as simple. But the one thing I can say that is simple is you have to ask the questions. Students and families have to ask the questions.
Love it. Thank you very much. Bob, did you want to add?
No, I'm fine. I'll let
Okay.
the other- Thank you.
I'm going to move into the next piece. A lot of chatter about testing, standardized testing, SATs, ACTs, and Craig, I'm going to call you in on this one. Can you speak to the trends in terms of test optional? Binghamton went test optional, and then there's always a conversation about, is it going to go back? The role of the testing, send it or don't send it. I heard a whopper this year around, if you're a kid from Westchester and you don't take the SATs or submit the SATs, that means you didn't do well and we're going to take you off the list, which is not true. So can you speak to any of that, please?
Sure. And I think we kind of hint at this. There's so many differences out there that
Yes.
it's very hard to like generalize the college admissions or experience. But yes, I mean, since 2020, 2021, a lot of colleges shifted to a test optional landscape. And frankly, there were a lot of colleges that were test optional through and through, and they still are. So if testing was a concern, there's plenty of great options, and there always will be. Right now, there's more than ever, but in terms of predicting what's going to happen, let's say over the next year or so, which I know a lot of us are thinking about, it's still hard to do. But what is key in this term of test optional is you want to have options. And one of the options would be you take the exams and then you
Right.
decide, where do you want to use that, if you want to use that? And how does that fit the landscape of schools that are right for you? And test scores, they get lumped into the academic bucket, right? That's where the transcript is. A lot of that historically was predictive analysis. Like we understood what a lot of these scores meant in terms of students who succeeded on our campus. It wasn't the big decision. It was one of the factors in the decision. Schools like Binghamton, a big state institution where we had very high testing averages, they've only gotten higher over the years in the test optional landscape because those who did very well submitted those scores and that was used, right? So in terms of things to think about, students and families, when you're preparing, I still going to stand with the recommendation that you should prepare and take the exams, SAT, and if you have the time and resources, the ACT, try it out. If you like one more than the other, maybe take that one again. Many colleges super score, they'll put combinations, the highest combination of your 2 or 3 sittings. Don't go
Right.
more than 3. 3 sittings, you're not really doing much to help yourself in the long run. They'll put the highest combination together. Look, we're trying to find reasons to admit. I think we've all said that in many different fashions, right? We're looking for students at their strength. We're not going to make the assumption that you didn't do well on the exam without having any evidence that you didn't do well on the exam. We don't actually have the time to do that. So if you decide in the test optional landscape not to submit it and your scores and everything else are great, meaning your transcript and you're doing all great work, that's going to shine. We're going to lean on that. And maybe that's what you wanted us to lean on anyway. That was the optional factor. So try not to get too caught up in the noise, but also don't give up on the idea of what a test score could show, right? It may, in some cases, if you had a rocky academic road and you had a pretty solid standardized test score because you prepared for it and you did your due diligence, that might show the college a bit of stability on a national level, right? So there's some things to think about when it comes to the exam versus just thinking that it's a filter. We're not using it to filter students in or out, but it's something that gives us, even if we do switch back for the SUNY system right now, which is a huge system, 64
Right.
campuses, the decision hasn't been announced yet if test optional will continue. What that means is, again, everybody should still be preparing, to go through the process
Exactly.
here.
Thank you so much. And I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're going a little bit longer than I thought we would, but this is such a great conversation that I don't want to end it just suddenly. So I have a couple more questions for the panel. I always invite families to go ahead and write in. It seems like folks are getting what they need because I'm not seeing a lot of questions or any, which is just fine. So I'm just going to keep going. My last couple of questions, Catherine, Bob, if you guys want to speak to this, it's about, how can students start to kind of develop their passions or identify their passions as they're getting in from one year to the next, or how do they go about that so that they can show it when they're ready to apply?
I can start just quickly. As far I see it from the gap year point of view, if that makes sense. So from the gap year point of view, if a student, let's say, I always suggest, and I'm sure Rebecca, you would assume this, to have the students apply for college while they're a senior. I think they're going
Yes.
through the process with their college counselors at school, getting teacher recommendations, all of that. As far as the gap year world, if they get in, awesome. But if they don't, or they don't get into the school they wanted to go to, you're not going to go to college if you don't like the school. We've made that pretty clear tonight.
Mhm.
But a gap year can really add a lot to a college application. So when I say passions or interests, the amount of experiences starting in that summer before, right after graduation, any experiences that a student can partake in, or even the first semester of that fall, can be part of their new application if they want to reapply. And it's been really, really successful with all of my students that have applied. And some kids have just applied to really completely different schools. But they're like, you know what, the first round was not great for me. So I would say, as far as maybe deferring a school that you don't like and reapplying, go out of your box a little bit, get out of your comfort zone, do some really cool things, because your essays and your application will feel really authentic, and you're going to stand out anyway because you chose to take the courage and take a gap year, right? And I think that colleges, the admissions officers can talk about this a little bit, but I think colleges actually love gap year students because they are a little bit more mature, and when they get there, they tend to be more leaders on campus, and they have had a little bit of an academic just break for a moment, right? And so they're more engaged in college life. So I would say just do some really interesting and experiences that you feel passionate about, or gain some new interests during your gap time.
Okay. Bob, did you want to add to that piece in terms
Just
of
that,
a student who will be applying, in terms of developing those interests and passions?
right. I just I tended to be very cautious about, especially even the early grades, using that word passion, and you have to find your passion, because kids can interpret that as, I got to get a resume. And that factor, the passion factor, is going to be true at, those highly selective schools, and Ben touched on, things they're looking for. But for 80% of the other schools, passion is not going to be a deciding factor. It's going to back to transcripts, going to be grades. And And the other question that we often get is, well, what should I be doing to make myself more acceptable?
Right.
And, my answer to that, as much as is do what you enjoy. Just do what you enjoy, and for juniors now, they're worrying about, gee, what do I have to do this summer to make myself look good?
Well, and I think Ben said it before when he said you can see that when somebody gets one award for something that they did for a couple of hours, there's not much depth to that.
Yeah.
So really giving time and attention and thought to the things that you care most about, because that will certainly rise to the top as well.
So I think that's we have to be very careful to be given a message that they're in a state of becoming. They're not nearly there. So
Right.
let them enjoy these years of high school, and it'll work out.
Thank you. And so it brings me to my last question, which is actually tied into a question that's being posed from one of our attendees this evening. And Julio, if you want to speak to it, and then I invite any of the other panelists to speak to it as well. So the question is to the school representatives, so to all, and Julio, you had the last question too. So do you foresee a change in essay submissions for this year because of the ChatGPT noise of the last few months? So with the advent of the ChatGPT, and what are your thoughts on that? Is there chat around that right now?
Gotcha. I think I'll take the essay in a two-part question, if that's okay.
Works for me.
So let's. I will answer that, but I'll go back to the college essay in general.
Yeah.
Take your time with it. Start
Yeah.
writing it now. Just start. The best advice I ever got with a college essay was write a paragraph, put it away. Put it away for a couple weeks, couple months, whatever it is. Write another paragraph, put it away. Keep doing that. And then by the time summer hits, you'll have a complete different essay than you would have, because there's no stress. I think a lot of students get stressed out with the college essay because
Yes.
they may leave it for a certain time period and figure out I have to be the best at this and I have to write it and it has to be perfect. It's like, just put something on paper, which leads me to the ChatGPT. I personally haven't heard anything about it through any of my networks, just
Okay.
as of yet. But I will say this: writing is an essential tool, in my opinion. And the better you get at it, the better you do at it by writing. So use what you can to assist, but that is why you also have wonderful counseling departments, wonderful English teachers, because when you get to these institutions, whatever they may be, they may have their own writing programs, their own writing specifications, their own ways of doing things, their own softwares to go through papers, as I know all of my institutions that I've attended and been at have.
Right.
So again, technology is great and it's a wonderful tool, but at this point, utilize the repetition of writing as best as you can.
Thank you.
And if you're funny, write a funny essay. If you're not funny, don't write a funny essay.
Let it be who you are, right?
Let it be, exactly.
your
Let it be.
voice.
And the last thing I will say is, as a person who reads a lot of applications, as many of my colleagues do, grammar is probably the one thing that I would say. Your uses of capitalization and things of that nature. Proofread, proofread, proofread. And please, if you're applying to Western Connecticut State University and you decide to put Bucknell in the essay I'm reading, that may be a problem. So just
Yes.
proofread as much as you can.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of all of my questions, and I invite all my panelists to turn on their cameras. If there are any parting thoughts, words of wisdom, pieces of advice that you would like to share out, please feel free to do so. This has been a fabulous conversation. You all have been an amazing group of presenters. You're already an amazing group of people. I already know that. But you've just done such a lovely job of giving us all such great information and things that we need to think about as we move forward. Is there anything left to add to the toolkit as we say goodnight?
Yeah, I'd actually like to weigh in on the question.
Yeah, go for it.
What often gets lost it's a personal essay. What often gets lost is the personal. Like too many students look at it as either some kind of literary exercise, which it's not, or they look at it as some opportunity to brag about themselves, which, you read 100 essays about winning the big football game. You're like, okay, we get it. You're a good football player, better than me, I'm sure, at that age. We read the essay because we want to get to know you. We're looking for something that's unique to you. If a AI bot can replicate Tom Johnson, we're in trouble. I don't think it can. You read enough essays to get a sense of what a 17 or 18-year-old is kind of capable of, or what that voice sounds like. And I'll be honest, I do wish more essays were kind of written about what your lives are like. I mean, I'm a middle-aged guy. I'm going to be 50 in a couple of years. Do I know what it's like to be a high school student in contemporary America or India or Canada, some of the places I read as well? Not really. I think there's opportunities for you to talk about that. I'm always going, why? I'm always asking the question, why? Like, why are you into this major? Why are you into this subject? Why is this your favorite team? Like, I think answer the why and write about yourself, because that's really what's interesting. Because it's the essay is really one of the few places in the application where we have no idea what we're going to get. And I think that's kind of exciting. I think the best essay is you feel like you just had a little conversation with somebody. Is that going to make up for C's on the transcript? Not really. But I think what it can do is you have people that seem to be reading very similarly in terms of the numbers. And some people just seem more vivid. They just seem more alive. And I think it's often in part because of how we react to the personal essay. So no, I think we're a long way away from the essay. I mean, what I've read so far, it's bloviating, right? To use the old made up nonsensical word. It's a lot of BS. It's a lot of riffing. It's a lot of like, someone trying not to answer a question. But it's not a lot of insight in terms of the person there. So I think that should be what's called, too many applicants, the essay, it's fine. Yeah, you don't need remediation, but it's not adding anything. And I think for a lot of applicants, it's a missed opportunity. That's
Cool.
too bad.
Thank you, Ben. All right,
Rebecca-
folks. Yeah,
Rebecca, I
Bob.
just have one word of advice for parents. Don't underestimate how well your kid knows themselves and what they want and how they can figure it out. All during that entire senior year, I worried that my son was going to make the right decision. And when it came time to make the decision, it was his decision and he did the right thing. So give them a lot of credit for figuring it out. Give them a lot of credit for who they are, figuring out who they are and what they want. It'll
Thank
make the
you.
whole year a lot easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. This has been a fabulous night and a fabulous conversation. So thank you all again for giving of your time and giving of your expertise. Good night, everybody. This concludes tonight's presentation. As I said before, we will be posting this presentation on our PHS YouTube channel, and we invite you to share it out. So thank you all. Have a good night.